welcome back to Distributed 2019. Today's session is going to be on creating a culture of performance in distributed teams. And I've got a really exciting panel of subject matter experts to work on this design session together. But first, I thought I'd baseline a little bit around creating a culture of performance. And for questions over this session, we want to keep it interactive. We want to have some, get some responsiveness from the audience, as well as you'll see a lot of back and forth and creation. And let's get on to the exciting stuff, creating culture of high performance in distributed teams. Before we get into a lot of the how and kind of the playbooks here, let's talk a little bit about this topic. So firstly, culture of performance. I've spent 15 to 20 years thinking about how you can create more dynamic and more excellence-focused organizations. And there's a huge amount written. At a really simple level, I think about cultural performance as having a high percentage of competent people collaborating in high percentage effective ways to create high percentage business outcomes. So how can you get more of the skewed top talent to be working together in some of the benchmark modes of collaboration to achieve benchmark business outcomes? Sounds simple, is truly hard is what we're going to find out. And then the extra challenge here is, what does distributed mean here? How do you do that in a distributed context? As I said, I've done this for a long time, and I've mostly tried to avoid distributed because it's so hard to do it when you've got people in the same room, in the same level, building this kind of energy, building this kind of common understanding, building a reflective practice. How do you do that across offices? How do you do that in a mix of partially remote and co-located or fully remote? And how do you do that when you're moving across time zones? So the flow of the design today is really going to start with exploring cultural performance. What are the levers to pull? What's hard about that? Who are our go-tos? And then what are the extra challenges with distributed here? And what can you do to address those challenges? I'm going to come up with a bit of a playbook. So let's look at the goals here. Firstly, thanks for joining a panel. I'm scared of panels as well as I'm scared of distributed things originally. So we thought, how can we make this panel the best use of 50 minutes for you guys? And I thought 3 ways. Firstly, we're going to create a clear model for how people leaders or learning designers could think about a cultural performance in the context of distributed. So we want to come out with a clear model here to help inform our thinking. The second thing is we want to create a checklist of useful actions. So if we feel if you can walk away with top 5 actions to consider for how you can build or optimize your distributed collaboration around high performance, we hope that's going to be a valuable takeaway. And lastly, in terms of tone, I hope you all feel like you overheard a really genuine conversation between subject matter experts. So we're here to really, this is hard stuff. None of us are doing this at 100%. We're going to try to be really genuine about how we think, what informs our practice, and what our challenges are. So part of this genuine conversation between subject matter experts is made possible because we have these incredible people. Let's hear a little bit about them. We have Mazzy Cameron, who's a Global Director of People and Organizational Development at StubHub, and Amy Zebrowski, who's an HR Director at Wrike. Mazzy, do you want to kick us off a little bit?
Yeah, sure. Hey guys, I'm super excited to be here with you today. And especially excited because distributed is kind of describing me as a person. So I'm a nomad. I'm Australian, but I've lived in now, I think 6 or 7 different countries, and I've traveled to 70. And so I'm obsessed with culture at a macro level, let alone in an organizational context. And so being in all those different countries, I've always had roles that have been working across boundaries, let's put it that way, whether those are geographic, whether those are, different cities in the same place, but certainly distributed teams has been a woven theme throughout my story. So yeah, my current role, so I worked over 20 years in different places across the world around people, organizational development, culture, learning, all the hats you think you can wear in the HR world, except for recruiting and compensation. I think I've taken time in most of them, and currently I've got 2 hats. So I work on the eBay leadership team for organizational development. So that's an organization that looks at, it's a large organization that's been around for, I think everyone knows eBay, so I don't need to explain it, hopefully. But StubHub is more of a smaller, leaner organization that I have direct responsibility for in regards to like having experiences and going and seeing shows and things like that. So yeah, so I'm excited. I have a distributed team of 45 people in over 10 continents. And so I often work crazy time zones in order to, and I've got some weird hacks that I'd love to share with you in keeping people connected across multi-geography. So I've got people in EMEA, LATAM, NA, and APAC. So it's a lot of challenges and a lot of opportunities and a lot of insight in how to create a cohesive sense of connection and that sort of a team.
Great, thanks, Maz. Amy.
Yes, hi, thank you very much, AJ. So my name again is Amy Zebrowski. I'm the HR Director for North America at Wrike, which is a cloud-based work management platform. I have been with Wrike for about 2 years now and have seen rapid growth, not only in terms of numbers of our people, but also spanning new geographic regions. So as of today, we have 7 offices in 6 countries around the globe. We also have a very distributed US team. So there are 2 offices here in California, as well as 42 remote team members in 18 states. And continually growing. So naturally distributed, as Mazzy has said, is also something that is a very important topic for myself. A big facet of my role is partnering directly with our international leaders and HR directors for our other regions and acting as a liaison to make sure that the practices that we're doing here, if they're scalable, are also being accessible to employees in other countries, and that we are really trying to maintain a one Wrike image across all of our locations, and employees have access to the same sort of culture in each region. So that's something that's very exciting to me. I'm really thrilled to be part of this conversation today, talk about some of our best practices, and also learn from Mazzy and others what we can be doing even better.
Excellent. Thanks both. And then I'm sure you guys have heard a lot about Miro. We're also a mixed distributed team. So we have 4 offices in San Francisco, where I am now, LA, Amsterdam, and in Perm, Russia. And we also have distributed people layered around there as well. We're around 210 people. And this has been a figuring out both, of course, our product is about enabling distribution, but also a lot of our practice has been about experimenting with ways to get across what is really up to 12 hours of time difference and make it feel like we're in the same room, we're as productive or more than other teams who are. So thanks again for Amy and Mazzy. Amy, Wrike's one of our benchmark companies we think about when we compare ourselves and who we want to become. And Mazzy, one of the benchmark HR leaders that I've known for a long time. And when I think about who I want to become in the future, you're there as well. So let's get into it. Let's start off with the first phase. Let's think about high performance. The first question is really, what kind of levers do you guys think about pulling when you think about building a culture of performance in general, not necessarily distributed, but to build a culture of performance in your organizations? What are your big go-to levers?
Mazzy, go ahead.
It always happens, right?
Mm-hmm.
I would say I think about this really systemically. I think it is a systems issue, and so I think levers is the right language, and it's certainly language that we use. And it spans the entire employee life cycle, right? From the kind of people that you attract, to the way that you bring them in, to how they feel when they're here, to you know, the sense of recognition and accountability and progress that and badging, let's use new language, that they feel like they're getting as part of the journey. And I think so I think it is multi-levered. So I'll just reinforce, I think it is a systems thing, that there's no one solution. It has to be tackled from all of those dimensions. If I think about high performance, and leadership obviously is critical. So if I think about our organization and where we're doubling down, because, you know, everybody wants to orient their business for growth. So to do that, you want people that, and you know, I think we're doubling down on leadership and we're doubling down on mindset. So those are two things I would offer up. So we talk a lot about owner's mindset. And there's something that happens, and if you're in a startup, this is probably something that, and you're a maturing startup, this is something that you might be designing for, which is the bigger you get, that owner's mindset is something that you really need to more actively cultivate. And I think a high performance culture, we've noticed the people that are high performing feel like they're owners of the business. And so if we can unlock the feeling of being an owner, that is that you are responsible, that you're accountable, that you have decision, that you have empowerment, that you have autonomy, particularly at the leadership level, then that cultivates an environment for everybody else around risk taking, around trying things, around failure, that is really helpful. So yeah, so one of the levers definitely for us is leadership and mind, and in the leadership space, not so much, yeah, skills is important, but I think mindset we're finding is more and more critical. The way that people think informs the way that they show up or the practices that they demonstrate. And so unlocking that owner's mindset in as many people as possible really unlocks more performance because people feel that they own it. So that would be one lever I would say. Obviously bringing people in that have that, can thrive in that sort of environment is already setting you up for success. So much harder to shift people that haven't gone or don't feel that way than it is to attract people that is their DNA. So I think the more people that naturally get it is obviously a quicker path forward. So the more people that you have that are orientated to going +2 or whatever language you use in your organization, like going above and beyond, like, you know, the extra step, you know, whatever. I think having more of those people around raises the bar. So yeah, it goes through the whole pipe. So getting them from the start is critical. Shifting people that have been in an ecosystem that wasn't like that is a harder ask. And ultimately, I think for leadership, it's the responsibility of them to model the way. So I think for us, like our leaders definitely need to be owners. They need to model the way. And if they're not, it creates a bit more cynicism deeper down in the system around performance as a culture in general. So those are a few things I'd say. Feedback, I would just add in, throw in feedback. Constant feedback, regular feedback culture is critical to performance because that's the only way that, you know, we talk about growth mindset a lot. So growth mindset and feedback culture are things that are pretty familiar to us.
You've just sold the reason why you should have a mind map to chart discussions because I think you said like 36 useful things there. But it sounds like the big focus was on having an owner's mindset, and you described that mindset, but in a way that's kind of cheating because culture and mindset are the same. Like, what do you do to build this mindset, right? Because you could say high performance culture and high performance mindset somewhat similar. What kind of levers do you have to pull to change that that mindset?
Yeah, well, we actually teach people about neuroscience in the brain. So, I mean, we found that an unlock. We do a lot with the Neuro Leadership Institute around, you know, how you think informs how you show up, right? So we're more around mental training than the other things because if we can unlock the mental. So I think there's a lot of robust science around it. And I find that our people, especially people that are particularly science orientated or need factual information, they lap this up. This is scientific. This is something I can use. So, you know, we've used, for instance, NLI have a SCARF model, which talks about when you're in fight or flight, or I don't know. I think the understanding of, I think there's a realization that you can choose your thinking. So that's something we've been trying to teach, if that makes sense. So thoughts can come at you, or you could regulate them. You can choose them, and you can direct them. And so often in our organization, that's very landscape driven. So if I talk about StubHub, things can happen to us, right? Like the Warriors don't win the third game, therefore we lose huge amounts of GMS. Well, we can't control that. So yeah, things can happen to us, but you know, the controllables, what is that? What is it that we can do? Like that's the unlock we're trying to have. So I think we've invested a lot around mindset and mindset awareness, and we're running Wellness Fest right now, which is all about mindset, which is, you know, we're bringing in athletes that perform at peak, and the things that they do are practices, right? Like, we don't do them in the workplace. One of the things that was interesting, we had a mental trainer come in yesterday, and she's trained the warriors on mental agility, and, you know, blah, 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 all these other great people that I can't remember. And, but she said, how long do you think an athlete's career is? And everyone was like, I don't know. She said, well, 3 to 5 years. And she said, so they have to perform for 3 to 5 years at peak. How long is a corporate career? And everyone's like, well, 20 to 30 years. And she said, and yet you don't do the same practices. And so some of the things she was talking about for a performance culture are human performance things, like getting up, having intention for the day, hydrating, like all of the things as a human being that you need to do to bring the best of yourself to the office, create a high performance mindset. And people really took that on. I think that they felt that they're so busy often, and they don't have the capacity or the space to be able to do those things that, you know, actually are going to stop burnout, actually are going to drive a sustainable high performance, right? So, yeah, anyway, this is just top of mind because it was yesterday. I'm hoping it's useful. Yeah. Oh, AJ, I think you're muted.
That's a classic challenge with Distributed. You're half the time you speak, you're muted. Thanks for sharing, Mazzy. Amy, what are your go-to levers when you think about?
Yeah, well, thank you, Mazzy, for sharing that. I think you touched on a lot of really great points. I think the point about mindset in particular is I mean, it all starts from the mindset, right? And so that's actually one of our values at Wrike. Our organizational values is growth mindset. And so I think a lot of it is in setting the stage foundationally at that level. When you first bring people on, you're setting an expectation with those that you're in the recruitment process with, for people that you bring in on day one, setting a foundation and laying the stones for what your high performance culture looks like, and creating the right mindset around it, and hiring around that mindset as well. So I know that's something that's very important to us. Digging a little bit more into the recruiting piece as well, I think that's a big part of where building a performance culture begins. So for us, you know, there's a big component where there's a focus on diversity. There's a lot of value to be said, and there's studies that have been done that show that people are happy in their roles and likely more productive as well when there is a more diverse work environment. And so that is something that Wrike tries to focus on, both on diversity of hiring, but also inclusion, in order to build more high-performing individuals and teams, because they feel as though they're surrounded by this diversity of thoughts, positions, perspectives, opinions, backgrounds, which really adds value in the organization to the kind of work that's being done. That's one really big component for us. I think tools is another really important thing to note. Obviously, Miro, I'm sure for you, AJ, and your team as well, is something that enhances performance there. It allows you to collaborate, to jot down thoughts and things that sometimes are more abstract if we're just thinking about them in you know, those terms. It's great to be able to visualize and say, here's a map for you know, what I'd like to do or how I'd like to take this and action it. For us, obviously, Wrike is a tool that we use internally, and in terms of performance, it certainly allows us to see the performance of things visually as they're progressing, to see where tasks are, and collaborate as a group, which definitely enhances the performance aspect. I think another big piece would be training and enablement. So we have just within this year actually brought in an entirely new enablement team. So we have a head of global enablement who has done some really great work in the past year. We've launched sales boot camps for our entire sales organization, which happen for all of our team members, distributed or not, rather they're hired working remotely from their home offices or in our EMEA offices or our US offices, they're all going through the same enablement process. They're learning what the sales process looks like inside and out. They're going through a certification to make sure that they get the chance to practice and understand the content and really be set up for success from day one. And I really think training is absolutely critical to continued ongoing performance down the line. You know, that said, I think it should be something that doesn't just happen and stop after the initial onboarding, you know, in the first 30, 60, or 90 days, but should be something that continually happens. So we're always looking at building out new programs around this ongoing enablement. We have monthly calls when there's new product releases, so our teams are informed, and lunch and learns, and summits and kickoffs and opportunities for our groups to continually be thinking about that performance. And again, it ties back to the concept of growth mindset, I think. And then just one more piece I'll throw in there, because I think there's a lot of levers, but just to highlight a few of them, Mazzy also talked about feedback. And I think connected to that is the idea of recognition. Recognition is obviously a critical component for people to feel as though the work that they're doing is being valued, to understand you know, where they are performing well, and have the opportunity for their peers or their managers or someone to recognize that and showcase it, which is really a huge motivating factor for most people. So we use a tool here called Bonusly, which actually is a peer-to-peer recognition platform. It does allow managers, not only managers, to recognize their team members, but also team members to recognize one another, which is a really great channel for recognition and continued high performance. We'll have folks that go up there on the leaderboard that says, you know, Johnny is the top bonus receiver for growth mindset this month, and it creates sort of a fun spirit of competition and also the ability to celebrate one another's accomplishments. So, you know, again, just to sum it up, I think diversity at hiring, you know, properly setting expectations and integrating values into your culture, recognition and enablement are some of the key levers for building a high performance culture. Oh, AJ, we got you on mute again.
Let's see if I can do that every time and get a 3 out of 3. Wonderful, some super interesting points here. And I think you touched on my personal favorite at the end, expectations. I think expectations for performance are super critical. They sound really obvious, but if you survey employees and you ask them, how clear are your expectations, or how clear is what good looks like for your role, I'm always surprised how many people say it's not clear to me. Even after company-wide training on for all managers on how to write expectations and feedback on how to write it, still having 20% of people in surveys come up and say, it wasn't really clear what was expected. Especially as we move into more agile organizations and we're not doing waterfall planning, that forecasting expectations has become only harder. But I think learning how to write good quality expectations, be it for scoping a role, for someone's first 90 days, for the next 6 months of their journey, for what they need to do to get promoted, that skill for a manager, I think, is really, really correlates to a performance culture. Because if you can write expectations, you can assess expectations, you can give feedback on expectations, you can incentivize expectations in a really powerful way. So that's one extra additional thing to the wonderful topics you guys have all added.
Can I pile on to that a little bit, AJ?
Yes.
And just say, one of the things we're doing a lot of, we're doing our end of year performance success process, right? Performance management process. And we're doing a lot of sessions with managers. And one of the things that's coming to be more of the new normal is that they're like, well, things are changing all the time. So expectations are constantly changing. It's not like, you know, it's like, whatever you said in Q1 no longer applies in Q4. And so one of the things we're starting to have more conversation around is, how do you set and reset expectations? How does it become a conversation rather than a process? And so that it's clear to everybody. But I think, I don't know if this is true of Amy, your organization, or of other people that are listening, but for us, it's been much more of a cyclical thing. Like at certain times in the year cycle, You come and you look at performance, and you look back, you look forward, etc. And then because things are so rapidly changing, your boss that you have now might not be the person that managed you 3 months ago, and so on. Like, it's just requiring a much more iterative approach, and therefore what we're finding with our managers is it's requiring us to build much more muscle for them to have the right conversations to set those expectations that are constantly changing, which is a harder thing to do because it's more of a it's more around the softer skills, right? Or which are really the harder skills, as probably everybody knows. But yeah, it's something that's becoming really clear to us is, yeah, we need a much more iterative, constantly happening ability of managers to, okay, things have shifted. Here's where we are now. Here's what's expected of you going forward, because things are shifting so regularly. I don't know if that's true, Amy, of your organization as well.
Yeah.
Yeah,
definitely, very true. And it's a really great point. It's actually something, so we have bi-weekly leadership, little kind of bite-sized micro learnings that we do with our leadership teams here every 2 weeks in each of our offices. And that's something that's come up recently in the last several sessions, is the concept of change management. And a big part of that is not being reactive and saying, wait a minute, we have an uproar from our team about these things that have shifted that they didn't know about, and now they're feeling as though they weren't prepared, but really trying to train and teach our leaders to be more proactive about that in order to set the expectations that this is coming. Here's what we can expect in 2020 or in this next quarter. As things are shifting. And obviously sometimes when there's rapid growth, it's difficult to be ahead of the curve, you know, that quickly. But I think even being able to say and set the expectation, this is still moving, this is still a moving target or something that's shifting or that we're working on, and, you know, having the ability to be completely candid and transparent about that with your team. I think something else that connects to that, Mazzy, is I think before you can really even properly set expectations, you have to actually have a culture of transparency where it's okay, you can actually talk about what those expectations are. So an example I'll give you is you know, something we recently did or rolled out also with our sales organization is expectations around performance, and when, you know, can you expect, if you're not meeting quota, to have a conversation with your manager to be put on a performance plan. And it's something that I think makes a lot of people uncomfortable. A lot of leaders are uncomfortable with the idea of talking about that, but the reason we did this is actually based on feedback from teams and exit interviews and different stages of the employee life cycle, that I want to just know, you know, what I can expect for my role, and so that there's no surprises when you sit down and have those feedback meetings with people. And so that's something that, you know, we've had to sort of gradually over time build this culture of transparency, so there's not such a discomfort around saying that and not such a discomfort around hearing it, but it's more of, you know, okay, now I feel like I'm walking in every day. I know exactly where I stand. I know what my manager wants me to be doing on a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly basis. And I know how I'm performing against that expectation.
Thank you guys so much. I think we've canvassed a bunch of really important levers here. What I'd like to throw to you next is I want you both to share. It's hard enough to build a cultural performance in a co-located organization. What are your top two things, just top two things, top two challenges that adding distributed brings to these kind of elements? So thinking through, be it recruiting or enablement or a mindset, when you try to do that in a distributed organization, what are the top two challenges you're going to face that make that even more of a complex task?
I think one of the biggest challenges for us is, so we, you know, on the work side, on the business side, our tool is entirely built around distributed teams and being able to have collaborative work management. But, you know, so from that perspective, people can easily work on projects no matter where they're at in the world, and the momentum continues. But I think from a cultural perspective, that's where it's a little more challenging. How do you carry a culture, you know, from one office hub where it all begins to all of these dispersed teams that are all over the world in different offices and different locations. How do you carry those values that exist at the core of that organization? You know, how do we make sure people in Dublin and Russia and the US all care about growth mindset, execution, and collaboration? I think that's one piece that's difficult because you don't have as many opportunities for those touch points. There's less of the casual, you know, passing interactions or conversations. And so that's one piece I think that's been a big challenge. You know, I think the other piece is just the concept of inclusion. So allowing all of your team members to feel as though they're part of this bigger mission, that they're connected to what the organization is doing as a whole, and they understand their role in that, as well as within their own teams, you know, allowing them to feel the sense of belonging, to build friendships and relationships with other people in the organization. That's one thing that's really, truly critical for employee happiness. And it's obviously more difficult if you're not in an office every day where you're interacting face to face with your colleagues. So culture and inclusion, I would say, are two areas that I think are a challenge as we continue to grow.
So what that triggers in me is both of them are really about the challenges of creating an immersive employee experience when you're distributed.
Mm-hmm.
Right? People aren't, either when you're in the same room where you're bumping into each other, or to like culture rubs up against one another from seeing it, modeling it. But how do you make it feel like we're in the same room when we're not in the same room? And that's a lot about technology and practice. I think that immersion idea is a really big challenge. Mm-hmm. Mazzy, what do you think? What are your top two challenges here?
Yeah, no, I love it. You guys are making me think, which is wonderful. I'm gonna tag on. I'm glad you went first, Amy, because you said something that you gave me a nice word that was capturing sort of things that were percolating around belonging. So I put the word intimacy down originally because we talk about intimacy in our organization. I know that's not familiar to everybody else, but belonging also is a good substitute. So I think people at the edges feel most removed from the effort often, right? That's the way that I hear it. So in our organization, the Australians, that we've got 2 people in that office, we've got people that work from home, and they're often the people that feel most at the edges. It's probably the best way I can say it. So creating that sense of one team, one culture, activating those values in people that are the furthest away is definitely a challenge. It is a challenge that I think we can solve for, but it is definitely a challenge. And it takes effort because often they're forgotten, I find. So if you're in the room or you're out of the room, it's the ultimate exclusion inclusion thing, right? So I think whatever the room is in your organization, knowing and being noticing that or knowing that is really important, having awareness. So I'd say building relationship across, and I think relationships across boundaries. So we work across cultural boundaries in the truest sense as well. So Spanish people working with American people, right? Like we run town halls, and our town halls are really positive. And so I did a trip to Europe last week, and they're like, why aren't they saying that this isn't working? I'm like, I don't know. And so it's interesting, even the distributed nature of teams, the language needs to capture everybody in a way that speaks to everybody. So that would be one thing. So something around relationship and teaming. And then the second thing I put is information dissemination and communication. I just find, honestly, just very tactically, time zones. So globally distributed, I'm going to put the word global in front. It requires someone to have pain. So someone needs to get up at 3 in the morning. Someone, you know, if you want to have the moments where you viscerally and you connect on a screen together, someone's going to have to take some pain. We've got some solutions for that and how we've solved for it. But I think it is living in a global world. The opportunity is that you can follow the sun. The challenge is getting everybody into one room for one conversation.
So what that makes me trigger in myself is that you've talked about communications processes, and I think there's both like, how do you communicate? What are the practices? What are the platforms? What are the rituals? I think who is in the room is a great idea of a ritual. Like, does it matter if you're in the room, or is who in the room is whoever's on the call? One thing I remember there at Salesforce, one of the top execs had a rule that if there was a meeting with people on the call dialing in and they couldn't hear someone speaking in the room, the person in the room had to leave the room and dial in, because they were like, you should be mindful of, like, we value everybody. Everyone has to be part of this conversation. It's not going to be a two-tiered system.
Yeah.
You mentioned comm systems. Another one here is artifacts and documentation, right? So what are your records of common understanding? What are your records of shared experience? I think in distributed, that really relies on that a lot more. You need that kind of sense of shared identity and experience to leverage from your practice.
Yeah, I think, and to kind of layer on, AJ, to some of the examples that you were sharing. So, you know, I talked about these leadership sessions we have, and I just got a piece of feedback this week from one of the managers who's actually based here in our San Diego office. So not typically distributed, but does have an alternate schedule, and is out of the office typically a little bit earlier in the afternoons and zooms in to a lot of our sessions. And so one of the pieces of commentary, my thought coming into this meeting every 2 weeks is, you know, let's set us on mute while we're setting up, and they don't need to hear all our side conversations. And piece of feedback I actually received was, you know, actually I feel like left out of the conversation by that happening, because everyone's in there having fun and laughing, and I'm not able to share in that experience, which was really enlightening. And also, you know, going back to that communication piece as well, I discovered we use Slack very heavily to work with our distributed teams. And, you know, we had a channel for every one of our office hubs, our Dublin, our San Diego, or San Jose. But then what about our remote team members? We were using Slack or email as a common means of blast announcements for things that affect everyone in a region or in the company. And we're realizing there are these pockets of people that aren't being reached because at the time we didn't have a remote Slack channel. We didn't have a remote email distribution list. And these are things I think that we have to sort of learn along the way. But it's really valuable, obviously, when we get that feedback from people who point out that this is something I'm experiencing, and it's not, you know, it kind of opens your eyes to what other areas we have where we can improve that to better reach a full audience. And so one of the things that we are doing here at Wrike to try and better address some of those challenges is we actually have a member of our people operations team who is going to be going remote, who will be 100% of the time actually out of the office, aside from occasional visits. And this is something that's completely new, I think, for us in HR. Mazzy, oftentimes we think our business is the people we work with. And so how do we support, you know, an organization of people when we're not physically there to reach them? And so I'm actually really excited about this, because part of her focus in this role will be on working on programs for remote employee engagement. And who's better to do that than someone who's in it day in and day out and understands some of those challenges.
So I can jump in.
It sounds like an amazing challenge.
Yeah.
I think it's great you guys are leading by example. We've got 10 minutes. So what I want to do is I want to do quick ping pongs of, we've just had a bunch of challenges. I want to come up with a laundry list of actions. Like, what can an HR leader or a people designer do specifically? And I want us to keep them really short, one-line actions. And then we're going to do a quick vote. And then I think we'll come up with an amazing product. So looking over all these challenges from immersion, communications, boundaries, let's download. What would be in your checklist of consider doing X?
For distributed teams to be effective?
Yeah, for any of these, to address any of these challenges about, you know, we've mentioned things about creating common culture across offices or working across time zones, having clearer communication systems, information dissemination. What are kind of the top tips to consider, the top actions to consider taking?
I think one would be giving them access to the same benefits that other team members who are not distributed have.
Great.
So we have stocked kitchens and snack areas, and one thing we started doing was actually sending out a monthly snack pack to our remote team members, so they also get access to that benefit.
Yeah, great. One from my side is considering which process you can adapt to include remote folks, or you need to wholly redesign. Like some processes we can adapt and make it work. Other processes we've got to build from the bottom up.
Mm-hmm.
And adding on to that, using, like what you said, Amy, using the remote folks to inform that design is incredibly important. Very tactically, when you're running in like distributed meetings, I find ways to create intimacy and get everybody into the room and all the voices into the room enhances the dialogue, whether that's a quick check-in at the start, whether it's distributing information in advance, whether sometimes you decide actually everybody's on a screen today, nobody's in a room, there's not going to be a two-tiered system. You can decide that as an organization. I think those choices can change the collaboration environment in which people connect, which can be accelerating.
Yeah, definitely. Meeting practice. Any other ideas for how to create that sense of immersive connection?
I think, you know, one thing that we're tossing around the idea of doing, and I think maybe some of the other panelists spoke about it, but was this concept of creating other means to connect with people. So one of the things we're looking at doing is like the donut Slack channel, which would pair people, anyone who's interested in making that connection with someone else randomly in the organization. And I think by getting people to opt into that and take part, it'll allow us to make and bridge some of those connections that might not otherwise be made.
One of the coolest things that our team did, our work from home did, is a virtual potluck. So they all created their own food at home and they took photos of it and they shared it. So they still had a potluck, they just had it distributed. And so I thought that was a really good example of, you could probably take normal practices and distribute them by design.
Mm-hmm.
I think also thinking of technologies that trick us into imagining we're in the same place. So obviously Zoom is a huge one, like seeing each other's faces, hearing each other's voices is massive. I think things like Miro, like the experience we had when we first did this call, Maz, of you seeing the cursors moving around, to see each other's intention in front of you and be like, oh, that's where Mazzy's looking. That's where Amy's looking. Now she's adding something. It makes us feel, tricks us into thinking we're together. And having that illusion helps us actually get a lot of the benefits of being together. Yeah,
and you totally trigger in me. The biggest thing I find difficult with the 45-person team is ideation across boundaries. And so usually it's like some weird camera pointing to a whiteboard that nobody can see on the other side of the screen, right? So I think these sorts of things, like I love this because it's like everybody can see the same thing. You're at the same virtual whiteboard and therefore everybody's level set. And I think that's incredibly powerful for especially brainstorming, which I find is much harder across geographies.
Yeah, and I would expand that even to say the tools that we're giving access to our team members, Wrike, Miro, Slack, Zoom. I mean, these are all tools I think that help enable that collaboration across regions. Another thing I think that seems kind of obvious, but we haven't really said yet, is any opportunity you have to actually physically bring people together, I think is critical. We try to have at least, there's kickoffs that happen a couple times throughout the year where you have an entire team that's together. This will be the first year actually that we'll be inviting all of our remote team members to attend a holiday party in their designated home office. And even if it's once per quarter or twice a year, having the opportunity to physically be in that space with your team members is crucial to building that culture and those relationships, that intimacy that you talk about.
Yeah, and I would say this, just the steady drumbeat of interaction, however that comes to bear, is the heartbeat as a distributed team member is the life beat. So it's really important to not cancel meetings or to change things around because people are relying on that, particularly if they're remote.
Yeah, it's a great challenge and opportunity because it puts so much pressure on your project planning tools, your communication tools, how you bond teams. Like I think a lot of distributed teams just go unbonded and we're like, well, we're not going to make them create safety and trust, which is crazy. They need safety and trust a lot more. And I think a lot of the methods, the normal methods can work, but you have to pick immersive technologies to make them feel connected and really be disciplined about doing it because you're not going to get the signs that it's a problem until it's way too late.
And I would say, guys, look, honestly, this is the simplest thing. If I said one thing that I think was the simplest thing that has bonded my group globally, it is every meeting we start with a check-in question that's human. So I say, one word, describe your mood, and every voice comes in the room. One word, one thing that you're excited about this weekend. One, like it's very quick and snappy, but there's something about humanizing and getting every voice into the space that actually cultivates intimacy, like in some ways, even in a more enhanced way than a face-to-face, weirdly. So that's, I mean, it's super tactical, but I do it every meeting. My team at first were like, what do we need to do it? And can't we just get into the agenda? I'm like, no, we're going to spend 10 minutes on this because that creates safety for us to have the right conversation that will then follow.
I think, you know, that's a good point, Mazzy, even though it is more tactical, the way that you run those meetings as well, allowing pause for people that aren't in the room to have a chance to speak up. It's more difficult to raise your hand and say, I want to say something when, you know, especially if you're doing a screen share, you can't see other faces there. So allowing pause or calling out specifically to anyone on the phone, anyone there that wants to participate in this discussion, reminding them consistently, you know, they're there, their input is valuable, you want them to participate.
And I do this, if you agree with something saying in the room, just do like this. And then everybody feels validated. You see what people are saying. They don't actually have to unmic. It's like just little nonverbal things that make a massive difference.
Let's spend the last 2 minutes answering a couple of questions on the call. Magdalena asked about some of this stuff seems quite easy for white collar workers. What about blue collar workers? And I'll answer the first and throw to you guys. I think there's a lot of great stuff from 20 years ago from like Toyota quality management. Thinking about well-being, togetherness, collaboration, that can be deployed, and I think there's some, no one I've known has done that for distributed blue collar workers, but they're able to do co-located, quality focused, team focused, well-being focused organizational practices. So I think that could happen across any employee segment. One for you, Maz. If you need to hire for a position fast, is growth mindset and ownership mentality something that you would compromise?
No, because we're going to pay the price later. We often have that. I have hiring managers come and say, we need to fill this role. And we're like, yes, but we need to fill it with the right person, not the first person. So I don't know. Look, it depends what you value most in your organization. Maybe that's not, if you don't value those things, and those things are the most important success enablers that we talk about in our business. So they're an assumption for us. So I would really push back hard on getting a hire in that didn't demonstrate those things.
Amy, how do you, from the people's perspective, ensure that a potential hire is compatible to a distributed organization?
Sure. So through the interview process, you know, we're trying to be very, again, transparent and set the expectations, going back to that initial discussion we had, that this is a very distributed organization. We have nearly 1,000 people across 6 countries, and your manager might not be in the same office as you. All of our tools are based on the ability to collaborate and work with distributed teams. So I think setting that expectation up front, and you're able to read the nonverbals and the reactions from people that are comfortable with it or are not comfortable with it. And so even through the interview process, a lot of what they do, they'll have virtual interviews via Zoom. They'll have to do demos and things like that virtually. And so we really set it up to where they're sort of being tested towards that environment from the start.
Fantastic. I'd like to thank Amy and Mazzy. Thanks for a really provocative, interesting, and deep discussion. There's so much in the notes here, some great actions. Thanks for taking the time to share your experience with us today. And thanks for joining us for this great conversation.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much.